Hey guys, Steve here at Beat Small Stakes, and this week's poker video vlog. Sorry for the delay with this one coming out. Had some travel, and then also, as you can see, we've upgraded our filming setup here. Got this cool lighting setup, which I'll probably show you sometime, and got this cool backdrop and this lighting effect going. So a lot easier to crank out videos now, so again, apologize for the delay. Today, what we're going to talk about is playing against loose whales. So what we mean by that is a player with deep pockets who often in a small stakes game is just kind of screwing around. They're just having fun. Maybe they just left the blackjack table where they're betting $100 or $200 a hand. So small stakes, no limit, really doesn't move the needle for them unless they really just kind of play like a maniac. The money doesn't mean much to them. They're going to be calling huge raises and three bets with really crappy hands. And I just wanted to address this because I get a lot of questions about this where people say, "Hey, I'm playing this game and everybody's kind of crazy. There's a bunch of guys with money and they just call me down no matter what and they keep hitting two pair on me." Now that's going to happen. And if you've been following me for a while, or if you're a member of the masterclass, you know that when we have an advantage, we want to push, we want to get chips in there, but we still want to keep people in the hand. So you've got to remember, if you each have, let's say, a big ace, you have ace king and they have ace 10. Keep in mind, they only have three outs. If we're not looking at making a straight on us, they only have three outs that they can spike that can beat us with two pair. A lot of people get really scared with that and will back off and they check back when they really should be going for value against these types of players. Now remember, this is not for every player type, but it's certainly for this kind. So I wanted to get into a couple rules here and then show you some example hands. So my first rule here is to raise big to isolate. So we want to get heads up with these guys. So let's assume we're playing 1-3 no limit hold'em and we're nine-handed, pretty standard table. Say max bind is 500. If we've been there for a while, we built up a nice stack and we're both really deep, we definitely want to raise much bigger than we normally would because these guys are going to call and we're going to get heads up with them. If somebody else at the table happens to have a monster hand, that's the only time they're coming in, then we can hit the brakes. But we're trying to isolate and get these guys heads up in a pot. And when we make a big value hand, we're betting huge. Way bigger than we normally would against most opponents in small stakes. But again, this is a unique player type. We talk about these guys in the masterclass. It's part of our character mapping system where there's 6 different player types of small stakes games. And these guys, you really want to milk and attack and go for big value. You can't be afraid of building a huge pot with a single pair hand against these types of guys. And another way to say that, forget about seeing monsters under the bed and keep your foot on the gas with a made value hand. Now, if we're drawing or we have a speculative hand, we can slow down. But if we have a made hand, even just a single pair hand, like a top pair, top kicker type hand, we need to be willing to really step on the gas against these guys and get as much value as we can out of them because they're going to be calling, like I said earlier, where we both have top pair and they've got a crappy kicker like a 5, and they're just trying to spike two pair. The odds of them hitting that 3 outer is pretty small, but they are probably going to come along and pay to get all the way to the river. So we have to be willing to accept that risk, and the trade-off is we can win huge pots. So let's look at some example hands. For this first hand, here's our target. Here's our whale. He's got 2,000 bucks. This is a 1-3 table, $500 max buy-in. We're sitting on 1,300. There's another whale over here with 1,000. So we want to isolate one of these guys. So they both end up limping. Get another limper, another limper. Now we would normally raise to isolate here to maybe 25, something like that. But here we want to get one of these guys in here, so we bump it all the way up to 50. I know that seems crazy, but one of these guys is likely to call. We just hopefully just get one of them to call. And these other guys that have speculative hands that could outflop us, we get them out of the way and we get heads up with our targets here, our rich targets. Under the gun calls, and unfortunately we get the second caller, but it's not the end of the world. We have a good value hand here and we're on the button, we're in great position. Other players fold and the flop comes jack high, 2 diamonds, so we have top pair, top kicker. They both check and we're gonna go for some value here, about 3/4 pot, and under the gun calls and UTG plus 1 calls. So what do we think they have at this point? I would assume one of these guys is probably on a flush draw. Somebody might have a weak jack or a 7 or a 4, or some kind of a gut shot draw, or an open ender like a 5-6 or a 3-5, something like that. So we see the turn and it's a complete brick. Unless somebody has exactly jack deuce, 7 deuce, 4 deuce, we should still be way ahead. And obviously the flush didn't come in there. So both players check to us again. And at this point, if somebody had a set or 2 pair on the flop or the turn with this flush draw out here, they probably would have check raised us or bet into us on the flop, given this player type. So when they both check to us here on the turn, we're going to go for big value. And we bet big, about 80% pot, 400 into 520. So we're really putting them to the test here. Now under the gun folds, and under the gun +1 calls, and it's just half his stack. So at this point, we know he can't be sitting on a monster knowing this player type. He would have just check raised us here if he had us beat. So we assume he's probably on diamonds or he's got a weak jack. So we're getting the money in on the river if a diamond doesn't come. And it's a total brick, it's just a deuce. He checks to us and we shove and he ends up folding. And here in this example, we can see this first under the gun guy called with just 4-3 suited, which you can't blame him. He's a rich whale with a lot of money and he certainly could have flopped the world against us. And UTG +1 had a king high flush draw, pretty much garbage hand, king 5 of diamonds. But these are the type of hands that are going to give you action when you have a big hand like this. And because we kept our foot on the gas and we bet big on the flop and the turn, we win a nice pot of $1,300. We don't win his last remaining $400 on the river, but we also didn't lose to a flush. So one example here of keeping your foot on the gas. So what if this river was a diamond and he bet into us and shoved his remaining 400? At that point, we've got to know our player and go on the reads we've made with what he's done so far during the session. I would lean towards folding. You've got to look at the math. What are the odds that he's actually bluffing here? And it's probably very small. Most of these whales aren't too bluffing these types of spots unless they're drunk. All right, so another hand here. Again, we're super deep. We've got 2K. This guy has about 2K, and this guy has 1.2K. We're going to stay aggressive, play controlled chaos style, and we are definitely going to 3-bet here unless there's a 3-bet ahead of us. So under the gun limps, +1 raises to 20, folds to us with a button. We're absolutely 3-betting here all day. And we're going to make it just 60 because we want these guys in here when we have position. And both players end up calling. And the flop comes 4-10-9 with 2 spades. So we flop a flush draw. It's not a big flush draw, but we're probably willing to go with it against these two types of players. Now they both check to us. We do want to bet kind of chunky here again. We're going to go 2/3 because we don't really have a value hand yet. We'd bet bigger if we had a top pair hand here. But right now we just have a draw, so we don't mind them sticking around and putting more money in. And if someone check raises us big, we can reevaluate. But both players just call, so that tells us they're pretty much capped. They probably don't have a set or a 2-pair type of hand at this point because they would have check raised on such a draw heavy board. And the turn comes a 6 of hearts, so this brings in some pretty obvious draws like 7-8 just got there for the straight. Somebody could be sitting on 7-8 of diamonds in a flop like this. 2-pair is very unlikely at this point, but the straight possibility is there, but we also did just make a pair, so we actually do have some value. So when both these players check to us, we're okay to check in this spot because we don't have much of a value hand, but we have a lot of potential. We could spike trips or 2-pair or of course our flush on the river. So we have some showdown value here, so at this point we're just going to check because one of these guys could certainly have a 10 or a 9 at this point, and we don't really want to be betting right now when we're this far behind in this spot. And the river is the 8 of spades. This is a pretty good action card. So any 7 now makes a straight, Jack Queen makes a straight, and then of course any 2 spades make the flush. We have our flush, so it's unlikely one of these guys has a better flush, but it's possible. But against these player types, we still want to be going for some value here. So under the gun bets out $500, which is basically pot, and under the gun +1 gets out of the way. So now we have a decision. Now this player is a whale. He's wealthy, he plays $100, $200 hand blackjack. This bet really isn't a lot of money to him, so you have to factor that into understanding this player type in this spot. Now most players in small stakes, if they're betting pot into us on this river, we're both super deep like this, and we only have 5-6 of spades, we're probably just calling. But against this particular player type in this situation, with the history I have with him, I'm going for value here. I've made a flush. It's kind of difficult to make a flush. It's even more difficult for both of us to have a flush in this spot. And given our history and how wealthy this guy is and how little $500 means to him, I'm going to go for value here. I wouldn't do this against pretty much every other player type in a small stakes game, but against this guy, I'm going to shove, and he eventually ends up calling, and we see that he had the nut straight, Jack Queen. So he made the nut straight on the river, and even though we raised the river, he's thinking we could be bluffing. And why is that? Because we've been playing controlled chaos style this whole session, and he knows we're very unpredictable. He's seen us bluff all the way to the river. He's seen us fire with total air on a misdraw on the river and get caught with our hand in the cookie jar, but he's also seen us bet and have it. So he's not really sure what to think. So you've got to remember what your table image is. If you've been playing controlled chaos correctly, it's really hard for this guy to fold the nut straight here because we could just have a 7. Other players at the table would not get that kind of action, but we get it because we've been playing controlled chaos this whole session, and he just says, you know what? I've got to look him up. I can't believe you actually have a flush here. because we've been showing so many weird hands, bluffs, and value hands. He just doesn't know what to put us on, and he goes ahead with his nut straight here. And what happens is we win a $3,800 pot. Now, I know you might be watching this and thinking, okay, but that never really happens at 1-3. This happens at 1-3, especially on the weekends, especially as it get late into the morning. People have been playing all night, especially you got these rich guys that come over from the craps table or the sports book, and they are just gambling hard. I mean, I've seen this in all sorts of card rooms. You will also see this if the whale is waiting for like a big 5-10 or 10-20 seat in the poker room. They'll come over to 1-3 and just play like a total psychopath. So you have to be willing to go deep with these guys and keep your foot on the gas and push those edges when you have value hands, and good things like this will happen. All right, so that's this week's poker video vlog. Again, I try to do this about every week. And if you have a question you want answered, just hit reply to one of my emails, and I'll do my best to get to it on one of these videos. And if you're not on my email list, all you have to do is go to beatsmallstakes.com and sign up for the free training, and you'll automatically be on my list, and you can hit reply to one of those emails. All right, good luck with the tables, guys.